こんにちは、ハリケーンフットボールです。今回の教材は、サッカー日本代表に関する動画です。サッカー日本代表は、3月のインターナショナルウィークで、スコットランドとイングランドと対戦し、いずれも1対0で勝利を収めました。今回はアジアのフットボールを主に扱うチャンネルから、このインターナショナルブレイクの国ごとのレビューを行っている動画で、韓国と日本について話している部分を切り取っています。明らかな明暗が分かれた日本と韓国の違いを、どのように見ているのかチェックしてみましょう。
Next, we have South Korea, and boy, do I have a lot to say about this team. South Korea are terrible. They're still terrible. In the last video I made about South Korea, I talked about how they haven't got a starting 11 together yet. There is no team chemistry and how unconvincing they have been overall. When South Korea announced their squad, I was actually pretty impressed. Going into this international break, there was also a decent number of South Korea's players who were hitting decent form. Lee Jae-sung, Jens Kastrup, they're both doing fairly well in the Bundesliga. And Lee Kang-in also playing a bit more football than usual. Cho Gae-sung is back from injury. He's contributing to Midtjylland quite well. And of course, Oh Hyun-gyu is firing them in Turkey right now. Not only that, but there are also a few injured players who had returned, such as Pak Sung-ho. He's a player that I really love, and he was included in the squad this time around as well. So you would think that with their potentially strongest squad, that South Korea might finally choose a definitive starting 11 and have some resemblance of the system. But no, not at all. Not even close. Look at this team. Just look at this team. Alright, this is very clearly a second team that's been chosen, but that doesn't change the fact that South Korea in general were really poor across the board. Even the players who were expecting to compete for a spot in the starting 11 at the World Cup didn't look that great. Even the players who were just supposed to be in the starting 11, they didn't look that great either. South Korea, before the first hydration break in the 22nd minute, they looked pretty decent. I thought Hwang Hee-chan looked pretty good in this sort of weird attacking midfielder, left wing back hybrid position. He was really playing in between the spaces there, as well as drifting into the middle. Oh Hyun-gyu was also back in the starting 11. I thought he looked pretty good playing through the middle. But after the hydration break, everything fell apart. South Korea, honestly, pathetic. Kim Min-jae was just ball watching the whole time. Kim Tae-hyun was always out of position. Kim Jin-gyu and Pak Jin-sob just seemed to disappear as well. There was no midfield cover for this incredibly lackluster defense. It looks like Hong Myung-bo is trying to play counter-attacking football, exploiting Hwang Hee-chan's speed and Oh Hyun-gyu's strength in the air. This is a sort of strategy that sort of makes sense when you think about the players. They've got Son's very fast, Hwang's very fast, Cho Gae-sung, he's got good hold-up play, but it doesn't work. These players who are meant to be leading the counter-attack have zero support. Kim Jin-gyu, Pak Jin-so, Bae Jun-ho were always missing whenever Oh Hyun-gyu and Hwang Hee-chan had the ball, leading them to go onto these one-on-one situations which they just didn't have the composure to score from. Most counter-attacking styles rely on fast-paced breaks with multiple options. This is where the midfield is so important because they come in and flood these empty spaces that have been created by the attackers who are stretching the opposition's formation. This never happened, not once, and this is exactly why South Korea could not score. Like, look at this particular moment. Son and Lee Kang-in pressed the Ivory Coast defense and managed to nick the ball from them in their own box. Now, if Lee didn't dive, where are the options for him to pass to? Cho is the only one there. Son is tangled with Lee assisting the press. So the front main three are all completely occupied. Now look at all this space in the center created by Cho, Lee and Son's pressing, and there isn't a single South Korean midfielder exploiting it. There are so many moments that are identical to this that happened throughout this game and indeed the Austria game, and it is getting seriously worrying. I mean, seriously, look how comical some of this defending is. It's absolutely woeful. And the Austria game, I'm not going to bother talking about because every criticism you saw about the Ivory Coast applies there as well. Basically, South Korea fielded one of their best 11s and was still bad. Moving on to Japan. Japan spent their entire international break in the United Kingdom playing against Scotland and England. In both games, they didn't actually field their definitive strongest starting 11s, instead giving each member of the squad a decent amount of playing time across both games. This is a really good idea for Japan because of how much squad depth they have and how big and diverse their player pool is. Some of their key players have been injured, such as Kubo, who has only just returned from a 2-month injury, and Takumi Minamino, who obviously had an ACL injury, and he might not even make the World Cup. It's really important for Japan to find players who can play the same roles as these two players, who are arguably their most important players right now. So rotating the squad like this allows some of these players to get more accustomed to their setup. Against Scotland, they played an overall weaker side. The likes of Kamada, Mitoma, Ritsudoan, Ueda, they were not present in the starting 11. Hiroki Ito did start the game, but he came off at half-time to conserve some of his energy for the game against England. Overall, Japan really impressed me with their ability to transition seamlessly from their incredibly compact defensive formation to their rapid counterattacking one. Very rarely did I feel that they were exposed whilst transitioning between these two styles. And that's what makes Japan so good. Their 3-4-3 formation gives them this perfect balance in which they can sit back and park the bus, but still be threatening on the offense, putting opposition teams in a pretty tricky spot. Do you go all in, or do you sort of play in the middle? Japan's 3 centre-backs play just as centre-backs. No need to play out the back, no need for centre-backs to maraud forwards and overlap or anything like that. Just pure zonal marking. Nothing fancy here. On top of the fact that Japan's midfielders usually merge into the back line when Japan is out of possession, you have an incredibly solid defence, with the likes of Ao Tanaka contributing both as like a faux centre-back at times and then an attacking midfielder seamlessly. This means that with the wing-backs you can really experiment, and is why we have seen the likes of Ritsudoan play as a wing-back. Now against Scotland it was Daisen Maeda who looked equally as comfortable as a wing-back, even though he is really kind of like a striker or like an inside forward. I think Maeda did a really good job at supporting the younger Kodai Sano, relieving pressure from him by constantly giving him an overlapping option, as well as cutting inside to relieve him of any duties if he is struggling a little bit. But this was against Scotland, a team that I think most people were expecting Japan to beat. The real jewel in the crown was their performance against England. Japan beat England fairly comfortably in a 1-0 victory. Remember what I said about Japan being able to balance rapid counterattacks with a rigid low block defence? Well, against Scotland, Japan opted to play with the majority of the possession. They let England have the ball. They forced England to make these difficult attacking decisions, and quite frankly, England didn't have any good answer. See, England lacked any attacking threat because they started the match without a striker. Harry Kane was injured and Thomas Tuchel opted to play Phil Foden as a false 9. Now, all I want you to do is imagine Phil Foden trying to win a 50-50 against Hiroki Ito. And the reason I need you to imagine Phil Foden going into a 50-50 against Hiroki Ito is because of the way that Japan's defense is set up. It's incredibly physical, with their wing-backs coming back and making a rigid sort of 5 at the back line, and that forces England to either play through the middle, in which they inevitably run into the traffic of the two holding midfielders, or they have to go wide and cross it, which is completely futile when all of England's attackers are they're small. Cole Palmer and Phil Foden are not going to win any headers against Zion Suzuki. England pushed lots of players forwards to help support this attack and provide options for their attackers, potentially play around the box and wait for an opening. The problem is that whenever England then lost possession, you had Mitoma, Junya Ito, Ayase Ueda, Ritsudoan. They were just waiting to be handed the ball, from which they could immediately begin their counter-attack and sprint into the open space left behind by these England players who had moved forwards to help their attackers out. This is precisely how Japan scored their goal in this game. But really, the counter-attack starts from the defense, because all of those attackers that I just mentioned, they contribute to the defense just as much as the others do. Ritsudoan and Nakamura contributed so much to this defense, allowing the 3 centre-backs to hold their rigid positions without moving away from them, and they helped snuff out any of the crosses. Because of their support in the wide spaces, the three centre-backs could just stay in the box at all times, which means that whenever England did try to cross the ball, they could just head it away and then start the counter-attack. It's just that simple. As soon as possession was regained, these two players, Doan and Nakamura, they would bolt forwards, get the ball back, and then offload it to a player like Mitoma, who had plenty of energy because he wasn't running around pressing so much, unlike the likes of Kamada and Sano. Every single player on the pitch has a vital role to play, and it keys together magnificently. Keito Nakamura was probably the star of this game. He's a player that I think most people wouldn't expect to be in the starting 11 for the World Cup, but after this performance, I think a few heads are going to be turned, especially now that Minamino is injured. What if Minamino can't get fit in time for the World Cup? What if Kubo doesn't retain his form after coming back from injury? Well, it doesn't matter. Japan doesn't have to worry because they now have Keito Nakamura. This just speaks to how good Japan's squad is. Hajime Moriyasu has done such a good job at balancing the responsibilities throughout this team. He's done a really good job of making sure that every single player has a purpose and can always contribute, even if they don't have the most individual skill. This is the complete opposite to South Korea, whose players don't always look like they have a role in this team. Japan are still serious dark horses for this World Cup, and I have been absolutely blown away by them.
次は解説です。今回はそれほど難しいものではありませんが、あまり見聞きしないボキャブラリーなどを解説していますので、本日の解説をチェックしてみましょう。
There was no midfield cover for this incredibly lackluster defense.
ラクラストルは、精彩を欠いた、パッとしないという意味の単語です。もともとは、輝きがないという意味から来ており、プレーや態度に勢いや魅力がない状態を表します。サッカーでは試合内容が良くない時や、チームに活気がない時によく使われます。少し物足りないニュアンスが特徴です。解説やレビューで非常に使いやすい表現です。
Well, there was no midfield cover for this incredibly lackluster defense. Well, there was no midfield cover for this incredibly lackluster defense. Son is tangled with Lee assisting the press.
タングルは、絡まる、もつれるという意味の単語です。サッカーでは選手同士の足や体が接触してもつれ合う場面でよく使われます。単にぶつかるのではなく、お互いが絡んで自由に動けなくなる感じがあります。比喩的には問題や議論に巻き込まれる意味でも使えます。スポーツでも日常英語でも使える便利な表現です。ラプンツェルの英語タイトルはタンゴルです。
Son is tangled with Lee assisting the press. Son is tangled with Lee assisting the press. No need for centre-backs to maraud forwards.
マラウドは本来略奪しながら荒らし回るという強い意味の単語です。サッカーではそこから転じてディフェンダーが積極的に前へ攻め上がる動きを表します。特にサイドバックやセンターバックに対して使われることが多く、強く止めにくい前進をイメージさせます。普通のゴーフォワードよりもかなり迫力のある表現です。解説や記事でよく使われるサッカー英語です。
No need for centre-backs to maraud forwards. No need for centre-backs to maraud forwards. The real jewel in the crown was their performance against England.
ジュイン・デ・クランは、王冠の宝石という直訳から、その中で最も価値のあるものを表す表現です。つまり一番の目玉や最大の誇りという意味になります。スポーツでは試合やプレーの中で、最も印象的だった部分を指すときによく使います。少し大げさで印象的な言い回しなので、動画の解説やレビューとも相性が良いです。ハイライトなどと訳すと自然です。
The real jewel in the crown was their performance against England. The real jewel in the crown was their performance against England, which is completely futile when all of England's attackers are, they're small.
フーティエルは、無駄な、意味がないという意味の単語です。ただし単にダメというより、やっても結果が出ないというニュアンスが強いです。サッカーでは戦術やプレーが通用しないときによく使われます。例えばクロスが通用しない場合などです。努力しても報われないような状況を表すため、やや厳しい評価の言葉でもあります。解説ではよく使われる便利な表現です。
Which is completely futile when all of England's attackers are they're small, which is completely futile when all of England's attackers are they're small and they help snuff out any of the crosses.
スナフはもともと火を消すという意味の動詞です。そこから比喩的に危険や勢いを消すという意味で使われます。サッカーではスナフアウトの形でよく使われ、攻撃の芽を摘む、脅威を封じるという意味になります。ただ止めるだけでなく、危険になる前に消すニュアンスがあるのが特徴です。守備の良さを表すときに便利な表現です。
And they help snuff out any of the crosses. And they help snuff out any of the crosses.
いかがでしたか？このインターナショナルウィークにおける韓国と日本は、結果も内容も対照的に、日本が文句のつけようもない2試合を終えたのに対し、それと比べられるとなおさら、韓国のひどさや惨めさが強調されるようになってしまっています。具体的に韓国の問題だと話していた、攻撃時のバイタルエリアに誰も走り込んでいないというのは、それを修正して徹底するだけでも、全く違う展開になりそうな気もしますし、韓国ももう少し一段二段上のチームを作れるだろうとも思いつつ、日本はその上の段階にいるという実感さえでき、完成度が上がっているように感じます。イングランド戦後に日本代表の選手も言うように、もう少し守り続ける展開を減らしたいというのは、ただ守備の陣形を崩すリスクを負うくらいなら、クリアし続けるという感じに見え、個人的には、もう少し守備を崩してでも、ボールを奪った後に、前に押し上げてボールをキープする人数を増やしても大丈夫なんじゃないかなと感じます。完全素人の意見ですが、守りの時間は、ほぼ全員が守りつつけ、ボールを奪っても蹴り出すだけでは、その状況が変わり得ないでしょうから、少し無理切る選手やプレーやマインドが少しだけあれば、もっと良いんじゃないかと思っています。それでも順調すぎると言っていいほど、特に世界のトップ10相手には勝ち続けて、負ける気がしなくなってきたくらいですので、もうすぐ来るワールドカップを楽しみにしたいと思います。本日もご視聴いただきありがとうございました。またすぐにお会いしましょう。